Hey everybody, my name is Ahmed Dents. I am the director of venue experience at San Diego Repertory Theatre. I hope y'all can hear me. Give me a thumbs up or throw something in the chat to make sure you can hear me as I'm checking all my P's and Q's and making sure I got everything working right. Again, welcome to We Are Listening. Again, my name is Ahmed Dents, director of venue experience here at San Diego Repertory Theatre. Usually I have my co-pilot with me, Jacole Kitchen, director of arts engagement and in-house casting, but this is a solo run today. We're going to be talking a little bit a little special episode. We're going to be talking about Sesame Street in just a few minutes. Want to give a big shout out to everybody here at San Diego Rep, at La Jolla Playhouse, and at the Old Globe that make We Are Listening happen. As you know, We Are Listening is a platform where we celebrate and explore the lives of Black creatives, artists, workers, administrators in performing arts. Now, coming up in January, next couple of months, we'll have some more live guests in here for you. But I figured this is a good way to end the year, especially as we enter the holidays. We're going to be talking a little bit about a show that I definitely grew up watching, and I'm sure many of you grew up watching. We're going to be talking about Sesame Street and dig into a little bit of the history that you may not know. Before we get started, just want to acknowledge our native community. San Diego Rep would like to acknowledge that the Lyceum Theater is built on the traditional lands of the Ipai Tipai Kumeyaay Nation, translated as the people who overlook the ocean from the cliffs. We also want to recognize their neighbors in the region, the Paya-Wokichum, the Kawia, and the Kapuno. San Diego Rep honors over 20,000 current tribal members living in our area and elevates local elders past, present, and future. We respectfully acknowledge these community members for their tremendous contributions to our region and thank them for their continued stewardship. And again, I would like to thank you for joining us for this special edition of We Are Listening. Now, I know we're coming up on the end of the year. Christmas is at the end of the week. New Year's is coming up. I want to wish everybody safe and happy holidays on behalf of Jacole Kitchen, on behalf of Freedom Bradley Valentine, and everybody else who works on We Are Listening at our respective organizations. Please make sure you visit sdrep.org for San Diego Repertory Theatre, Playhouse.org for La Jolla Playhouse, and the oldglobe.org, and check out all the great programming that is still continuing through this holiday season and into the new year. Now, what are we doing here tonight? Let me start off with not a countdown, but a count up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now, I know many of you recognize that cadence of counting when you hear it. It belongs and originated at the Children's Television Workshop, aka Sesame Street, and that is what we are going to talk to tonight. Now, Ahmed, what does Sesame Street have to do with anything with the performing arts? Well, we know what it has to do with the performing arts, right? What does this have to do anything with We Are Listening or representation or Black folks or anything like that? Well, a couple of weeks ago, I came up on an article that I was reading it was in the Smithsonian. It was an article. In fact, I want to pull it up for you guys so you can see what it is that I'm talking about. Here it is. It is, let me make that a little bigger for y'all. The Unmistakable Black Roots of Sesame Street. Yes, you read that right. The Unmistakable Black Roots of Sesame Street. Now, look, there's a lot of history here. We're going to go over a little bit of it tonight, but I definitely want you to really open your minds and understand how we got Sesame Street and how it became such a fixture in our social structure and just how it's staying power and what it was originally designed for. Now, when I started thinking about doing this, like I said, I had just read this article in the Smithsonian and a couple of other articles. And while I was reading them last week on the 13th, a brand new documentary dropped on HBO. I encourage all of you to watch it. Street Gang, How We Got to Sesame Street. This is such a great documentary. Goes hand in hand with the documentary about Mr. Rogers. But this documentary is on HBO right now. I really encourage you to check it out. Watch it. It's going to enlighten you to a lot of history of how Sesame Street started, why it started, and it's just fun to watch. It's a great documentary. It'll break some history, but we're even going to talk about some things that were touched on in the documentary, but we're going to go a little deeper with some stuff tonight. So again, thank you all for watching. If you're interested in any of these links that I talk about, I can post them later into the description of this video. But yeah, let's just go ahead and get into it. So again, the movie on HBO is called Street Gang, How We Got to Sesame Street. And it really just goes over the history. Now, a lot of us, we know about Jim Henson and Frank Oz, and we also know about all of our favorite characters, right? Of course, we know about Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch, and we know about Bert and Ernie and the Cookie Monster and, you know, the Count Dracula and all that good stuff. Did you know about Roosevelt Franklin? Yeah, Roosevelt Franklin, one of the first characters on Sesame Street. Well, we'll talk about Roosevelt in just a little bit. A little backstory, just to kind of get you to know where I am, where I'm going with this. And let me pull up this article again, the first article that I was really checking out, The Unmistakable Black Roots of Sesame Street. So in understanding how Sesame Street actually got its start, Sesame Street arose from the Lyndon B. Johnson administration's Great Society agenda. Now, this was a series of federal programs that carried the ambitious goal of eliminating poverty and racial injustice. Now, as part of these aspirations, Lyndon B. Johnson, who himself had taught poor Mexican-American children while in college, created, wait for it, Head Start, in 1965, seeking to disrupt the multi-generational cycle of poverty through early education programs and disadvantaged school children. What we're going to find out is that Sesame Street started as it actually started as a subversive program. It was started to disrupt what was going on in America, especially in namely a lot of the quote unquote ghettos and not so well off uh, neighborhoods in the country, especially those that were filled with predominantly brown and black children. How we got there to start off, again, started off by Lyndon B. Johnson's administration as part of the Great Society agenda. And the person they really went to put this thing together, her name is Joan Gans Cooney. Now, Joan Gans Cooney was a television writer and producer. She had produced an extensive report to the Carnegie Corporation in 1966 called The Potential Uses of Television in Preschool. I got another article up here that's absolutely excellent that I really think you guys should check out. It's called Dr. Chester Pierce and the Hidden Curriculum of Sesame Street. You can find this at the Sesame Street Workshop or the Joanne Gans Cooney Center.org. You see a picture here of Joanne and Chester Pierce. We're going to talk about Chester Pierce in just a moment. Again, just taking a couple of moments just to illuminate our minds onto some of the people who were behind Sesame Street that we did not know. We had no idea, or maybe some of us didn't know of these great minds that were behind this show. Now, again, Joan Cooney had, worked in television. She was a producer. But what was happening at the time is that even though you could call them children's shows, there isn't really much on TV that was helping to educate children in a great way. There were a couple of shows here and there, but with the amount of TV that was going on and how many TVs were being sold and how many TVs were in American households with not a lot of children's programming, educational wise anyway, I'm starting to worry a big part of the country as far as how long kids were going to sit in front of TV. The actual Carnegie Foundation, some other bankrollers, and the government actually asked Joan and some other people to come in and take a look at this and see what they could come up with. One of the first people that Joan reached out to, I'm going to focus in on this picture here, is Dr. Chester Pierce. Now, Dr. Chester Pierce was the founding president of the Black Psychiatrist of America, which was founded in 1968, right after the death of Martin Luther King Jr. Of course, you know the strings of deaths and assassinations, Jack Kennedy, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, that were happening in the 60s. Dr. Pierce, being a Black psychiatrist, along with a whole another group of Black psychiatrists, were really concerned with what was happening in America, and along with their white colleagues were not really even paying attention to the psychological damage or the psychological ramifications of what was going on in the country with race. In fact, they felt that maybe some of their teachings and findings were actually helping keep those racial overtones, those racial thoughts to the forefront. And therefore, that did lead to the founding of the Black Psychiatrists of America. Now, this is Dr. Pierce, again, here in a photo with Joan Gans Cooney, was one of the early workers here on Sesame Street. This is another great article, Psychiatry, Racism, and the Birth of Sesame Street. This is on undark.org. It's a psychiatry website. Another excellent article, and I'll just read here the byline here: how an African-American psychiatrist used an early TV show as a radical therapeutic tool to help minority preschoolers. So again, the concern by many people in the country, educators, doctors, was that children were just spending too much time in front of TV and there was nothing there for them actually to watch, that this was going to be really detrimental to their brains. In fact, this is taken from this website, undark.org. Just a quote: small children of all ethnicities were growing up glued to TV screens. This worried Pierce because he was not just a psychiatrist, but also a professor of early childhood education. And from a public health standpoint, he believed television was a prime carrier of demeaning messages, imagine that that undermined the mental health of vulnerable young Black children in particular. In fact, it was Pierce who first coined the widely used term microaggression in the course of study in the 1970s that exposed the persistence of stigmatizing representations of Black people in television and in commercials. So being very concerned with what was going on with TV, he also saw TV as a tool that could be used along with Joan Ganz Cooney, and therefore began the work on CTW, the Children's Television Workshop, which will become known as Sesame Street. Once the ball got rolling and all the work was done, they really went through painstaking ways and research to find out what would grab kids. If you watch the documentary Street Gang, How We Got to Sesame Street, you will see they were just doing extensive studies with children on what they paid attention to, what would happen, what would work. Again, we know about Frank Oz and Jim Henson, and I'm not diminishing their role. It was great. In fact, when you watch the documentary, you'll see that Jim Henson was not, the Muppets were not about children at all. The Muppets were late night characters who were selling everything from coffee to cigarettes to other stuff. In fact, they were pretty violent. If you guys have never seen early Muppet work from Jim Henson, the early commercials they were doing for TV, they were pretty dark, pretty violent, not for kids at all. But Jim Henson was brought on to this project to help with the puppets because they knew these would draw the kids in and they would definitely pay attention to them. Another person that they locked in was producer John Stone. Let me pull up a picture of John here. This is John Stone, of course, with Big Bird. John Stone was a producer. Again, this is from the unmistakable Black roots of Sesame Street. John said that the show's set design was actually inspired by a 1968 public service announcement campaign calling New York City residents to give a damn about children living in blighted areas. So remember last time we did a last episode where we talked about the question has always been asked lately, can performing arts, should a theater be a social justice organization? Can it be a social justice organization? I definitely should be, as we're not looking at the social justice term as we throw it around today, but social justice is, am I taking care of my neighbor? Am I taking care of my neighbor's children? Am I taking care of my neighbor? Are we being okay? Are we all right with each other? Are we treating each other as human beings? So definitely, I believe all performing arts organizations should be social justice organizations in that vein, especially if we're providing narrative and we say that that's what we want to be, then we definitely should do that and make sure we are presenting each other and ourselves in the proper light. Again, now John Stone saw this campaign while he was in New York, and I want to pull it up and I'll make it big so it takes up the whole screen here. This was the actual campaign that John Stone saw, a public service campaign in 1968 while visiting New York. Give a damn. And if you can't see it, I'll read it here for you. If you give a damn about the people in your ghettos, wear this button right here, give a damn. You can get one from the New York Urban Coalition, but you have to show us that you really give a damn. One way is by giving jobs. They can be part-time jobs, full-time jobs, career jobs, jobs for beginners. You can work out the details by calling that number, which I probably is not around anymore. If you can't give jobs, give money. 500,000 kids in New York's ghettos are going to need something to do this summer besides kill time. You can provide play streets, bus strips, a little recreation for them by sending your check to the New Urban Coalition. This coalition also needs your support long-term programs in the areas of economic development, housing, and employment. If you want a button, send your contribution to that address. But that was the campaign. That was the campaign that John Stone saw, along with some other television campaigns where he saw, a couple of ads where they were actually going through the streets of Harlem and some of the other boroughs. And they're actually showing the blight in some of those neighborhoods and the lack of resources and the lack of education. And so, I'm just running down some of these people who are on this early team to let you understand how Sesame Street was founded. Then I'm not calling it a hidden curriculum and I'm not calling it subversive. This is what it was called at the time. This is what Joan Ganz Cooney in this article actually calls it, the hidden curriculum. It was subversive. It was disruptive. It was supposed to break up how people looked at these kids in ghettos or in poor neighborhoods. It was supposed to break up the blight in the education, the lack of education and resources. It was supposed to be able to give these kids a sense of themselves and let them grow up to respect one another. Now, there have been criticism saying that maybe in the later days that maybe this did not help those kids. Maybe it overwhelmingly just helped kids who are more well off or lived in better neighborhoods. I don't know. I think from what I know, everybody knows Sesame Street, and I don't know what we would be right now. I don't know what my generation would be without Sesame Street being on that TV when there was really, nothing else on. Yeah, there was Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and there was the Electric Company, but we know Sesame Street was the one that really broke through to give kids self-esteem and really let them look at their neighbors and understand and have respect for one another. Again, great articles. Check it out. The Smithsonian, the Unmistakable Black Roots of Sesame Street. We'll come back to it. Also, Undark, Psychiatry, Racism, and the Birth of Sesame Street. So I want to move on, and I want to kind of highlight some of the team that was in the beginning with Joan and Dr. Pierce and John Stone, who really were going about their way that they were going to shape this curriculum that was going to be aimed towards the inner cities, that was going to be aimed towards the ghettos, that was going to be aimed towards those neighborhoods that were suffering for less. And as a byproduct, was spilled over into all the other neighborhoods as well. And this is an article from Ebony, January of 1970. Just a great article. I went through and read the whole thing. I found this abstract online. Titled Down Sesame Street. Yeah, the kids like it short, and kids are the bosses. And yes, kids are the bosses. And what I'm going to do right now is just take a minute to go through some of these people who were the founders. They were there in the beginning. We know about the Carnegie Foundation. We've heard about Lyndon B. Johnson and other foundations and funders who were behind it. And of course, the usual, bureaucracy that came behind it. But we really want to talk about the people who Joan picked and who Joan called out to really help push this curriculum, to really do the research and understand what it was going to take for this program to educate people and to educate them with going along. I want to start with this picture. I'm going a little bit out of order than I wanted to, but you see this picture here. This is, if you can see my mouse, this is Joan Coons. She, again, the one who was actually chosen by the Carnegie Foundation to do a report on this and was given the go-ahead and the funding along with the government, some other funders, to get Sesame Street. And I want to focus on some of these other women who are here in this picture. These were some of the early advisors. And I want to start off with, on my left, Jane O'Connor. She was an early member of the Children's Television Workshop. She was a teacher who served as a curriculum specialist in the production department. She was also one of only 2 African-American staff members at that beginning time when they first kicked off. It was the only one involved in the earliest planning stages. She's in the Sesame Street pitch reel. She's on Sesame Street itself, and she served as editor-in-chief of the Sesame Street magazine from its inception until 1973, at which point she became the curriculum editor, and then she left the magazine in spring of 1974. Let me go back to this picture, and then here, up next, we have Dorothy Hollingsworth, another early advisor on Sesame Street. Here is another great website called BlackPastorg. Just takes a look at African-American history, global African history. It's a great website. I really suggest you guys check it out, blackpast.org. But again, this is Dorothy Hollingsworth. And so the reason why I'm laying this out is to let you know how much not only of the aim of Sesame Street was that its primary goal was to reach kids in the inner city, especially those in the boroughs and ghettos throughout the East. It's just the ghettos everywhere, especially Black and brown ghettos. But to understand the strength in the people who were working on this show. We always talk about right now, representation matters, right? Representation matters. It's not about just who's in front of the screen. It's not about just who's on stage, who's working on the project, Who's bringing the insight? Who's bringing the knowledge? Who's telling you when something's not right? Who's telling you that, no, they don't talk like that, they don't walk like that, and we don't look like that? If you really want to be authentic, and you're seeing this as a prime example in Sesame Street in this founding. So again, Dorothy Hollingsworth, she was a prominent educator and politician, and she achieved a great number of firsts in Seattle. She became involved with the local civil rights movement, protesting restrictive covenants. Remember, we talked about restrictive covenants in our last episode, episode 33, focusing on Lorraine Hansberry and how much her father's business as a realtor and battling the Supreme Court over race covenants really affected her, and we would not have the Lorraine Hansberry and the great body of work in her civil rights work if she did not experience that as a child. She championed open housing initiatives throughout the city. In 1965, she became the first African-American woman in a major city to manage a major city agency when she was selected by the Seattle School District as a director of the Head Start program in Seattle. We're not dealing with people who are just, coming in to bring sandwiches and support. We're talking about educators. We're talking about politicians at a time when it was really hard for Black folks to be educators and politicians. And again, Head Start program, part of President Lyndon Johnson's great National Society Anti-Poverty initiative. She established, organized, and implemented the program according to the federal guidelines from 1965 to 69, which led her to be the national director of Head Start, to appoint her to the National Advisory Board of Sesame Street, the public broadcasting service, aka the Children's Television Network. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about some of these people so that we could really get an idea of who was working on Sesame Street and what the goal was. I want to go back to the image I was sharing with you from this 1970 Ebony Magazine. So I want to drop down here. So a lot of people remember a lot of the characters you grew up with in Sesame Street, but you might not remember who those original characters were. Now, a lot of you remember Gordon. I forget the man's name who played him all the years. Most of you remember him, bald-headed brother with the mustache, and that's who most of us know as Gordon, right? In this picture right here, you have a gentleman by the name of Matt Robinson. This was the original Gordon on Sesame Street. And next to him is Loreta Long, who was the original Susan, who played his wife. They were husband and wife on Sesame Street. So coming into your children's eyes was this Black married couple, business owners on Sesame Street. And Matt Robinson actually had a spectacular career in broadcasting. He began his career in 1963 as a writer, and soon after a producer and on-air talent at the television station WCAU-TV in Philadelphia. He hosted a show called Opportunity in Philadelphia. It was a weekly televised employment service oriented towards African Americans. He would actually later on, after Sesame Street, go on to work on The Cosby Show. Another note, what we do is so important, and what we do and what our children see us do is so important. Matt Robinson, one of his children, someone you might know, Holly Robinson Pete, most famously known for her role on 21 Jump Street and so many other movies and so many other projects. That is her father. You'll see her if you watch Street Gang, How We Got to Sesame Street. You'll see her and her brother talk about how they reacted to seeing their dad on TV and everything he was going to. Also in this picture with them, Susan Loreta Long was an actress, singer, educator. Again, there at the beginning, played wife to Gordon. She also lent her voice to many of the Muppet characters, including Roosevelt Franklin's mother. Stick a pin in that. We'll talk about Roosevelt in a minute. And in 2016, she published her autobiography, My Best Friends Call Me Susan. Loreta also got a doctorate and wrote a paper on her experience and education in Sesame Street. It's excellent. You definitely want to check it out. So another thing about Loreta, she began her career in 1967 in a variety series called Soul. Now, this is another Great documentary. It's available on PBS right now. It's called Mr. Soul. It was produced at the New York Public Television Station, WNET. Another documentary I really suggest you guys check out. It had to do with this founding of this show where it just wasn't anything on TV for Blacks, really showing Black culture. This show took it there in New York, and that's where Loreta got her start. I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back to Loreta, and I'm going to come back to Matt Robinson in just a few moments so we can talk about Roosevelt Franklin. Going back to this Ebony article from 1970, we're going to scroll down a little bit. See this handsome gentleman right here in the suit. His name is Latrell Horn. Another great resource, again, BlackPastorg. Latrell Horn actually worked for the Children's Television Workshop, aka Sesame Street. From the beginning, he was at one time executive vice president of the Children's Television Workshop and executive producer and director of its international division. When Sesame Street was expanded internationally, he was promoted to executive vice president of international productions. He worked closely with many foreign broadcasters, and it was him who was instrumental in getting Sesame Street to be broadcast in the Netherlands, Germany, Brazil, France, Italy, Spain, Belgium, and Sweden. Latrell Horn, another forgotten giant in television and broadcasting history. Also want to skip down a little bit and talk about one of the early animators on Sesame Street. And like I said, when I'm talking early on Sesame Street, everybody was involved in putting this thing together. These people were the forerunners to what we know of Sesame Street that put together this American institution. And right here next to Latrell, you'll see this picture right here. This is actually T. Collins. He was an animation pioneer. In the late 60s, he was in his mid 40s, and Sesame Street needed animation. CTWs, I keep using them interchangeably so we remember, Children's Television Workshop, Sesame Street, found that it was among the best program performing among young children, particularly animated commercials. Collins' time in TV advertising made him a perfect fit. Per the Indianapolis Recorder, Collins was key in encouraging and developing the idea that the TV commercial technique would best serve Sesame Street's pitch for letters of the alphabet. Another animation luminary who crossed over to Sesame Street, Faith Hubley, summarized the setup as selling education to children. And I just want to play this real quick. This is some of the early animation. T. Collins just passed away not too long ago. But yeah.
Nancy had a pet, a nice nightingale. I am a nightingale. Now, Nancy was a nincompoop because around her neck she wore a narrow napkin. One night in November at 9:09, she got a notion to visit a nutty nanny-goat farm. Numbskull, nitwit, nincompoop were some of the nasty names the other nanny goats called her as she sat nibbling on her nails. The granny nanny goat noticed Nancy and said, "Nancy, don't be a ninny. Never nibble on your nails." Nancy became nervous. She took off the narrow napkin and put on a nifty necklace.
Anyway, you get the idea. These were the early geniuses behind Sesame Street, not just in one facet, in every facet. The research, the planning, the psychiatry, the psychology, the animation, the education, the representation. I mean, John Stone is on record for saying he designed Sesame Street. It was paramount that Sesame Street was designed to look like Harlem, to look at the brownstones. It was important that the kids saw a neighborhood that looked like theirs, not some sprawling neighborhood with big wide streets. There had to be stoops and steps and trash cans and all kinds of people walking up and down the street. This was one of the pillars that made Sesame Street exactly what it is, or what its aim to be was to reach out into these inner cities and educate these children who might have been suffering from lack of resources. We know we're suffering from lack of resources. We know they were suffering from lack of money. We understand the politics of school districting that goes all the way back then, and redlining and everything else, race covenants. It's all, steeped upon one another. But this was the goal of Sesame Street. It was not, they were going to make sure that these kids were educated. That's what they were going to do. They were going to make sure that they were educated. They were going to make sure that kids saw themselves on TV. And again, I really encourage you, if you're not doing anything tonight, watch Street Gang, How We Got to Sesame Street. It is absolutely amazing. In fact, if you want to know where the song came from, can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? It was part of the campaign, because what was going on at the time, they didn't know how many people were going to be able to actually watch Sesame Street. You guys, some of you are too young to remember, but she used to have the UHF dial. And so you had to go and get on another dial to pick up stations like here in San Diego, like Channel 39 or NBC7, PBS, KUSI, all those channels. It was a completely different dial. This analog TV was a whole different game, and you were the remote control back then. But they were afraid, how are we going to let people know where Sesame Street is? Well, that's where they came up with the campaign. Can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? Buttons, t-shirts, posters, billboards, size of buses. That is where that song came from. Can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? Can you tell me can you tell me how to get to it on the TV so that I can watch it and I can learn something? I want to go back real quick, touch up on a couple of things that I told you that we would go back to. I talked about Loreta Long. Loreta Long being one of the first cast members. Loreta Long again came out of New York City television educational as a television star and an educator. Came out of New York City, was playing wife to Matt Robinson's Gordon. And I just want to share with you a couple of things really quickly. Just want to share this real short clip where she talks about the curriculum goals of Sesame Street. Take a listen.
The fact that Gordon and Susan were a married Black couple, the fact that a senior citizen was depicted in a very prominent, positive way. None of us were mainstream. Bob was Midwest, but Catholic, Irish Catholic. I mean, none of us were like the quote unquote norm. It wasn't Dick and Jane's old neighborhood, okay, with the picket fence. And that intrigued me, basically. Then, the next thing that I think is very funny, it took the 80s with Howard Gardner to codify what we're doing with the multi-intelligences. We just did the show, but by the time the letter A sang, danced, jumped, flipped around, we had addressed a lot of different learning styles. We didn't have words for that. We didn't have words for diversity. We were just doing the show. And that's why it's held up so well, because people are so used to it now, they don't realize how innovative it was. In 1969, there was nothing like that, like Sesame Street on before us. Nothing. Children's television didn't exist, really. I mean, there were a few shows for children.
I love how in that clip, again, that's Loreta Long. I love how in that clip she said, we didn't have words for diversity. We just did it. I'm going to let that hang there for a minute. We didn't have big words for diversity. We just did it. They just did it. They didn't need all the catchphrases. They didn't need all the big words. They didn't need the presentation. They went to work. Educators, producers, psychologists, psychiatrists, actors, puppeteers, studio people, TV people, radio people. They just went to work, and it was their priority, and they just did it. And I think, be honest with you, I think we need some more of that right now. I think we need some more of just doing it, of just doing what we need to do. and doing what we have to do. Now I want to go back, talk to you about the characters we know. Again, like I said, we know Big Bird, right? We know now Elmo, Cookie Monster, that was my guy. Oscar the Grouch, another one of my guys. Like, we knew all these characters, Bert, Ernie, all that, right? How many of you remember Roosevelt Franklin? Roosevelt Franklin was actually one of the first characters on Sesame Street, and he was the creation of who we talked about before, Matt Robinson. Now, Roosevelt was slick, okay? Roosevelt was that guy. Roosevelt was sharp. He sang like everybody else in Sesame Street, but he had his own class. Now, of course, Roosevelt Franklin was a flip on the former president's name, Franklin Roosevelt. But again, he was in season 1 through season 7. He made a couple of appearances later on. Roosevelt Franklin, again, he was slick. He was hip. He would come in. He would teach his class. He would give them the words. He always had the right answer. He was always on time. He was always there. What ended up happening with the character of Roosevelt Franklin and why he was gradually removed from the show was that there are actually complaints about Roosevelt, and not from who you might think. Many, and this is touched on a little bit in the documentary, many affluent and higher educated Blacks did not like Roosevelt. They did not like Roosevelt on the show because Roosevelt still had that swag. He still, not bad language. Now understand me. Not bad language, not bad grammar, not bad English, not silly, not acting stupid, not acting ignorant. They just didn't like his swag. They just didn't like that he still talked like a Black dude who lived in Harlem or who lived in Brooklyn. And they didn't like that he still just came in and he had that swag. They just didn't like it. They felt it was going to set them back. And it was due to a lot of the complaints of upwardly mobile, highly educated, those who were in the upper percentage of making money, Black people who really complained and didn't like Roosevelt. And that's what ended up really pulling Roosevelt off the show after a while, that criticism. And pretty much a while after Roosevelt left the show, Matt Robinson wasn't far behind. Again, you see Roosevelt here, just a cool cat, cool dude. You see a picture of him here with his pupils in school. Yeah, he was a good guy. If you've never seen Roosevelt, get on YouTube, Roosevelt Franklin, Sesame Street, really cool character. I wish he had stayed on longer. But there's always a price of something, right? Now, in recent years, we've heard pushback against Sesame Street, right? None of this stuff is new. We've heard Sesame Street about people not wanting characters to be revealed that's having different gender identities than they feel needs to be on Sesame Street. We've had, students come on. We've had characters come on. One character who's homeless or suffering from housing insecurity. We've run the gamut, right? This is nothing new with Sesame Street. That was the whole point. They knew that the kids were going to react to the puppets or the Muppets because they were all different colors, shapes, and sizes. And that was the point. There was a time early when this show was on in its first 2 years, there were some places, especially in Mississippi, who were just deciding they were not going to carry the show. And they felt it was a bad look. They did not like all of these people of color on screen educating their children. They did not like that there was a Black couple on Sesame Street. They didn't like the introduction of various Latino characters. They did not like it. And so a lot of these many of these different organizations and different television stations were just like, no, we're not going to carry the show. The proof is in the pudding. People protested. There were meetings, votes, and eventually Sesame Street ran out because people were starting to understand that the kids loved it and that it was actually educating their children. So don't want to keep y'all much longer. We're coming up on an hour. I just really wanted to, I think this is a great episode, especially this time of year where many of us are gathering with our families. And education is at a premium right now, especially coming off what we've come off with the pandemic and kids kind of getting back into the mode of school and education and being out of school over the last year, having to do remote learning, but then there's so much distraction. There are so many things happening on so many different screens. I really just want to take a moment and really examine Sesame Street, the impact that it has had, but also let us understand how it began, why it began, and who all of these great people, again, not on the periphery, not on the side, not as afterthoughts. These are people who were bought in to be founders, the originators. All of these people, along with all the great puppeteers and actors and actresses, they're the originators. They're the originators. They're the ones who put this together. I mean, look here. You think people were tripping? Nina Simone, 1972. Nina Simone was on Sesame Street. Young, Gifted, and Black on Sesame Street. Come on. So look, y'all, I know it's what it is today. It's Tuesday night. There's a lot going on. I'm gonna let y'all go now and get on to doing what you're doing. Again, thank you for taking the time to hang out with me in this special edition of We Are Listening. Jacole will be back with me in the co-pilot seat in January. Again, shout out to everybody who works on We Are Listening and all of our organizations. Big shout out to you, AJ, Mr. Conover. I see you out there watching. Thank you to everybody who has taking the time to kick it with me tonight. Freedom Bradley Ballantyne, my man, I'm hollering at you, all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, make sure you visit sdrep.org, lajollaplayhouse.org, and theoldglobe.org and check out all of the great works of art that we are putting together for you. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful Christmas, a spectacular New Year. Enjoy the rest of this holiday season, and I will talk to you again in the beginning of the year. Again, my name is Ahmed Dents, Director of Venue Experience here at San Diego Repertory Theatre. On behalf of my co-host, Jacole Kitchen, Director of Arts Engagement and In-House Casting at La Jolla Playhouse, and on behalf of my other partner in crime, Mr. Freedom Bradley Ballantyne, Director of Arts Engagement and Associate Artistic Director at the Old Globe. Thank you very much. Have a great evening. And remember, this is We Are Listening. We are not the other. We are the standard. Talk to you soon.